it becomes a given that you don't need any of these third-party vehicles that are simply monetary inventions. So that's gone. Investment initiative, if those that want to think about that, would still come from banks, but there is no interest or usury, first of all. Usury would be made illegal, not because of some moral concept, but simply because it is a mathematically invalid concept in a fixed economy. For the interest income, as we know, as I've harped upon, does not exist outright in the money supply. Interest has always been regarded as a corrupt notion intuitively by even early religions, so it's time you just simply realize the mathematical reality of that. And this brings us to the corporation, which in its very abstract notion is sort of the mechanism of production and distribution in the current system. In order for a corporation to work in the transition, it has to maintain a particular legal status which can be revoked by a third party if they're not in compliance with very basic environmental and labor decency protocols, if you will. A statistical evaluation and regulation, which we do have today, but which is bypassed through various mechanisms which you can easily trace back to the corporation, but they use legal loopholes to do this. Regardless, if basic decency of labor usage and environmental awareness isn't used, so as far as pollution, as far as labor abuse, the business license is revoked and that corporation can no longer operate. Is this the evil state power? Yes, it is, but I'm sorry to say, left unabated, the hyenas will destroy everything. Once again, I want to remind everybody what the legal system, in fact, is in the current environment. It is predominantly based on monetary regulation. If you went through all of the legislation in existence in America, I guarantee you a vast majority of it relates to money in one way or another. So the very notion of legal establishment is a overriding third-party orchestration that makes sure that there isn't abuse within a system that naturally gravitates towards abuse. So I just want to continue to dismiss this myth that the problem is some type of intervention with the so-called free market. I can't reiterate that enough because I'm so tired of that fantasy being used. In fact, all it takes is one law in existence to debunk the idea that the laissez-faire market system concept has some integrity, which it does not, because there are thousands of laws in existence required to make sure the market system orients itself in some type of way that seems to be productive without corruption, which of course persists perpetually. Any system that requires heavy legislation to make sure it works is invariably and inherently a failed system on one level or another. So keep that in mind. Which goes back to our point about resolving problems and the logic of removing the legal system through time, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. Okay, another transitional problem, a little decoupled from the current context, is the global poverty epidemic. Three things would need to occur. The United Nations or whomever would finance, subsidize, not corporations, but advanced independent food production facilities to produce condensed, scientifically engineered, nutritious food in a condensed form. It could come in an extruded tube, for example, that Jacques has talked about, which is extremely space efficient, where a block of this material could last for even a year in certain circumstances. Would it be tasty? It doesn't matter. These people are starving and they need something now. Furthermore, desalinization plants are immediately implemented everywhere possible, hooked into aero and hydroponic agriculture, which would be implemented for growth needs. So you have food generation done technically through highly condensed nutrition. You imply desalinization plants liberally along with aero and hydroponic agriculture to begin to create normal food production in these environments. If you were to do this with money, it would take an extravagant amount of it. So what you do is you have to have an absolute state initiative, if you will, to bypass that and go straight to the resources, either through subsidization or whatever. You just do it. You just do it because if you want to play the monetary game, you're going to have some serious problems. So a little open-ended on that distinction, but those three attributes have to occur one way or another if anyone is to care about the global poverty epidemic and transitioning out of that epidemic. The next crisis to address is the energy crisis, which of course most of the world is still unfamiliar with, at least in the West. We have to subsidize an entire energy project which will provide a fluid transition out of the fossil fuel hydrocarbon economy. What basically needs to happen is that all of the remaining fossil fuel energy needs to be utilized explicitly and deliberately for changing the global infrastructure quickly. This would have to come through a global initiative to literally nationalize all hydrocarbon resources on this planet, and a Manhattan Project of sorts of renewable energy issues should be created, and we use this remaining fossil fuel energy, which we are running out of, to change the infrastructure as, again, fast as possible across the world into renewables, and most likely a systems approach to avoid intermittency and everything else. As an aside, people talk about the limitations in the current system very viably, because it would take about $20 trillion and over 30 years to make the alterations possible, according to some ecological economists, if you will, that have invested time in researching this issue. And it's always been a big red flag. And the people that I've spoken with in regards to peak oil, one of the things they say is that the main problem isn't the fact that we don't have solutions, it's the fact that there's a path that has to unfold, which is going to be extremely difficult to achieve, given the hindrances of the economic system and the requirements of investment, return, and everything else. As we know, sustainability is not in accord with the basic ethos of investment return and the servicing of things rather than resolution of them. My friend Michael Rupert wrote a book called Collapse, which is originally called Presidential Energy Policy, and at the very end of this book he details a very intelligent manner of being able to get rid of all the problems associated with the abuse of the hydrocarbon economy and the attributes related to it. If anyone, it's probably online at this point, you could search for that, but I think there are some many good points in there. It's very, very detailed in a step-by-step logical way to move out of this system and to avoid further problems, if anyone wants to research that. Back to my point, you have to have a global initiative to change energy infrastructure if we expect to get out of this very problematic scenario. Okay, so we've dealt with the problem of inflation, debt, monetary expansion issues, making a system that avoids unemployment because of a systematic readjustment and shortening of the workday to bring whomever has the skill set into environments where they can be employed. This isn't perfect, and obviously there will be fallouts within such a thing, but it's the best that we can think of within this system, at least I can think of. We have energy infrastructure protocols changed. We have poverty being resolved through the implementation of desalinization, aeroponics, hydroponics, extruded food technologies with high nutrition. Corporations themselves are now strictly adhered to a strict ecological policy, and if they violate it, their entire ability to function can be removed, with competitive corporations taking up the market share. And as oversimplified as those issues are, I think it gives a general idea of what would need to happen to resolve basic issues in transition. Now, this leads me to some more direct overlap issues for transition regarding attributes of a resource-based economy that need to be implemented through time, such as the removal of money and the application of advanced technological methods to society, which will override the entire labor system as we know it. So a value system first has to occur as well to adjust to these things, and that's a big part of it. So always keep that in mind. I'm going to try to be as clear as I can with this, but it is not an easy thing to discuss. What has to happen first, as these problems of the crises that we just discussed are resolved, is that there has to be a systematic nationalization of all basic good and service industries. The most common precedent that has been met so far in the current culture is, of course, the, quote, socialization of health care. Health care as a service is a fundamental human need, and it's a basic social attribute of personal and social health, which is something that people tend not to understand. Having health care isn't just about singular human health. It's not a selfish thing in and of itself, narrowly. It's also about resolving the possibility of disease epidemics and spreading of contagions that can infest everyone and make a problem for the entire society. The individual is a part of the group. The true threats to humanity are really those created by the environment that we don't have control over. We always talk about this in regards to earthquakes, but it also comes down to disease and microorganism, plagues. These things can evolve very rapidly and gain immunity to our scientific methods of treating them, and we always have to be aware of what's happening in the society. So, point being, universal health care isn't just some individual necessity, it's necessity for the society, to make sure we monitor everyone and make sure that nothing that can invade the system, the social organism, can actually gain hold. So the provision of free health care that has occurred in Europe and in other countries is an important role, and it serves as a unique precedent for this so-called socialization. And regardless of what you want to call it, this type of pattern of subsidizing dire services for human well-being is what can create a fluid transition into a resource-based economy from the current economic model. As a quick aside, the subsidization of healthcare is done currently through taxation. Taxation and transition will be removed because it's not actually real or viable as an effective means. In other words, it's not actually needed. Taxation is an illusion. The public is made to feel like they're contributing to government and they have accountability or keep the government accountable in the sense of their supposed contributions of money through taxation. But what needs to be understood is that all governments on this planet make money out of nothing, and they make money out of nothing whenever they want to, essentially. If taxation was real, you would have a one-to-one basis, and you wouldn't have budget deficits as government acquires money from the public to use for its own issues. It does do this. It funnels money in that was created out of nothing, and then it just borrows more money out of thin air on top of it. It's just a big illusion, so I just want to throw that out there. Taxation is a waste of energy is what it really is in the modern system. But that's an aside. So, healthcare. Then comes utilities, water, energy, everything essential to living. Those become subsidized, socialized, nationalized. Then comes food resources, basic food resources. The basic standard of living attribute I talked about earlier would eventually be outgrown and replaced by literally the free provision of these food resources which can be acquired, creating the value system that things can be available for free. No one is going to go into one of these food distribution centers which have perishable items and take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tomatoes because it's perishable. So what are you going to do with that much food that you know is going to rot and go to waste anyway? Why would you resell it in a system where everyone else can go and get the same tomatoes for free as well? This will prove the logic of the value transition, that there's no reason to hoard and have excess in a system that will provide an abundance for free. So it will enable a move out of the profit psychology. Initially, yes, it will have to have maximum allocation limits in certain areas, I suspect, just to say that, okay, you can take this, but you can only take so much of it. But in most circumstances, that would probably not be needed. And as we apply more mechanization, which I'll go over in a second, to our production capabilities to create a livable abundance, along with the value system of people beginning to understand and watch as crime rates become reduced in their society, as disputes, as the horrors that they tend to have gotten used to throughout the prior culture begin to subside and ameliorate, then you'll begin to see people begin to respect what the system is and what it's doing. Now, in order to buffer the loss of monetary allocation that is occurring in these industries that are being socialized and provided for free to the society, is you have to apply mechanization to those industries in the same ratio of loss, if you will, as the money that is being reduced. Hopefully that made sense. So in the food industry and agriculture, it's very, very easy to mechanize. So once it's applied liberally, the efficiency will be such and the maintenance will be minimal that it'll take very little money to run the oversight